Thank you, James. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I'm just going to fiddle around with this because it's like right in the middle of my face at the moment. Does that sound all right? Yeah? Hear me at the back? Yeah. Great. Lovely. Thank you. Right. Firstly, huge thanks to Eileen for being here, not only to judge the Sir John Hurt Art Prize, which was wonderful. It was lovely to have her companionship and insight and knowledge, and I learnt a lot. And wonderful to have you here today for this bit of a chat.
Thank you.
So the first thing I thought I'd do is it's just a little bit of context. So Eileen was born in Derbyshire, in Glossop, in the Peak Districts. That's not very far from where John was born, interestingly. And you went to... I've lost a page. It's blown away. Can you believe it? Well, I know where you went. You went to Goldsmiths and then to the Royal College of Art. And there's obviously a big chunk between being born in Glossop and going away to art school. And I wonder whether you could tell us a little bit about your influences, how young you were when you started to work.
I think I was very lucky because my mum used to give me biros and notepads to draw on from an early age. So that was the classic materials I started with. And I must have had an ability to concentrate, actually, because people noticed that somehow I was getting somewhere, right from being quite small, with making pictures. So even at primary school, I was singled out a bit. And of course, when you're singled out, I'm sure it's the same for anybody who's good at anything, sport or what have you, you kind of like it and concentrate on it. And it was a real escape for me. I think I'm a classic middle child. So carried on being encouraged and went on to secondary school. And again, very lucky at a big comprehensive in Glossop to find one or two wonderful art teachers who just opened doors for me and suggested I should go to art school. I was really lucky because I was one of that generation who transcended their backgrounds through a government grant.
Mm.
I suppose, yeah.
Yes, which you didn't have to pay back.
Which you didn't have to pay back.
Yeah. So Goldsmiths was your first choice, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really wanted to, although I might have painted a rosy picture of my background, I really wanted to escape it. Mm. And right from being tiny, I knew I didn't want the life my mother had. Not to criticise my mother, who I loved dearly. And but I knew I wanted to get out of a town where everybody knew me as Jack Cooper's daughter.
Mm-hmm. And she was Jack Cooper? No.
Jack Cooper was my dad, Marjorie, my mum, and they had a small hardware shop. And people knew who they were, and therefore, if I was up to anything, people knew who I was, which I didn't really like.
So at Goldsmiths, most of your tutors were men, I think.
Every single one of my tutors were male, and some fabulous people, but also just a gap. Where are the women? Well, the women did arrive eventually, because that word feminism emerged in the early 70s, and suddenly people were aware that it wasn't quite right to have any sort of education course where it was all the information was delivered by one sex. But for my time there, I didn't have a female role model. But I did hear about a painter called Gillian Ayres, who you will all know about, who was very senior at St. Martin's School of Art, kind of, half an hour away on the other side of London from Goldsmiths. So, it was unusual. But people like Bert Irvin and Basil Beattie were lovely, kind to me, supportive, intrigued.
And at that time, still mostly drawing and painting? Or?
I've never really been able to do much apart from draw and paint. Very quickly, when I got to Goldsmiths, I sort of put my time on foundation, which was the most inspiring year I've ever had in art school, the foundation year. And I'm sure most people who've been to art school will share that thing about foundation really does transform you from being a kid into being somebody with potential. And I had life drawings essentially, and a few self-portraits and a little bit of imaginative work. So when I went to Goldsmiths, I was very unusual because people were already into performance and the early days of installation, although we didn't call it installation. And the whole group of students who were influenced by their tutors, Bert and Basil, for example, who were influenced by abstract expressionism. And in my second year, Michael Craig Martin arrived. He brought something very new, something far more conceptual into the mix. But I stopped drawing from the model. And when I stopped drawing from the model, something really exciting happened that I just found a way of expressing myself which I hadn't really been aware of.
But you had all that technical training, so there was nothing to stop you.
I was confident. I was very confident at making marks, but not really confident with paint because we had pencils and we had gouache on foundation and crayons. So I had to unpick all of that way of working to somehow develop myself as an oil painter. And it was a great voyage of discovery. And of course, the generation of people who taught me, having embraced abstract expressionism, were quite keen to throw out all the rules. You know, you could take the canvas and put it on the floor, pour and sponge paint. Not that I did any of that. I didn't do that till I was 40.
And then from there, Royal College. Straight there, or did you have a period in between?
No, I did everything really quickly and very young. So I was 18 when I started at Goldsmiths, 21 maybe, when I went to the Royal College, 22 perhaps. And so I did a lot of education very quickly. And I do think there's one thing about being young and green and naive, is that if you come across good people who tell you interesting things, then you trust them. If you're a bit older and with a bit more nous, you don't trust quite so much, so it's maybe a bit of a harder journey. I found that as a teacher, that the older, more mature students really wrestled with everything, and their progress was a bit more up and down. I seemed to fly along.
Mm-hmm. So from there, you finished at college, and you were already working, had a studio, and being pretty successful.
I think not quite. I think I still thought I'd leave the Royal College and probably have to get a job in a shop or something like that. I didn't really dare call myself an artist. I thought I would have to get a proper job. But I got a year teaching down in Falmouth, which was blissful. I felt I'd retired though, so I came back to South London, which I still haven't escaped. And some of my fellow students who'd been at Goldsmiths had already set up a studio in Deptford High Street. So I moved in there and I got work as a play leader and as a youth worker, and then I began to get a bit more teaching.
And you've always taught, you've continued to teach?
I always taught. I was lucky that I always taught part-time. I always think that as much as teaching, I learned so much, and still right until the end I learned so much. The end of my teaching career, not the end. I learned so much from my students, and they get you out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. At some point in there you got married and had a family.
Yeah. Another thing I never intended to do. I didn't want my mother's life, didn't want a family, and of course I've been a really hands-on mum, and I'm still with Malcolm, my husband. So I've been really incredibly lucky. But you do to some extent make your own luck. We all know that sort of managing children and part-time teaching and not really selling very much work in the beginning, so not a lot of income from life as an artist. It's a lot of juggling and prioritising. I discovered I'm very good at compartmentalising things.
And you've used your own experiences very much in your painting, I think. Motherhood and
kind of unintentionally.
Children.
My work's always had a sort of an autobiographical edge to it. So when I was a young woman, I did the paintings of a young woman, and they had a sort of awareness and interest in sexuality. And then I found myself to be a mother, and suddenly babies' bottoms began appearing. I think those paintings can be described as being quite primal, not so much objective. So having a sense of realism, perhaps, but not being anecdotal. It's not like, here I am with my babies. It was, I hope, much more primal than that.
But I think you have referred to yourself as a narrative artist.
Yeah, I do tell stories in my pictures, and especially over a series of works. So I like to think of them, I think, as stage sets where the very minimum of props are there to tell the story. And the viewer, I've said this many times, brings the last piece of the puzzle.
I think it was Norbert Linton, indeed it was, who said, naturalistic truth does not meet Eileen Cooper's purpose, which struck with me very... what do you think?
Elaborate.
What does he mean? I'm not sure I can. I thought, I hope you might be able to. He's not here.
I think I want my work to have a sense of truth. So there is a figure sitting or standing or lying or sleeping or engaged in some activity with a sense of truth. But it's not painted from life, but it reflects life experience. So maybe I'm a bit liberated from having to make, the kind of drawings that you would have done at the Slade or the Royal Academy at a certain time, or paintings that were what was required. I was freed from that a little bit. And the work that I looked at, I very quickly became aware of non-Western art through Picasso to some extent, I suppose. Picasso looking at African art. French painters looking at Japanese prints. So all those are real touchstones for me and still remain so. I'd like to look further back. I think pre-perspective is really where I find art at its most expressive.
So medieval,
yes.
Italian?
Early medieval Italian
Yeah.
painting, Romanesque, icon painting, and as I said, art from other cultures.
Indian miniatures, I think you've talked about before, yeah.
So those are my source material.
So do you have an idea and think or a story or something that you want to get across, or is it a visual image that comes into your mind first, or does it vary?
It completely varies. I might find a photograph that strikes a chord with the two paintings that are in the Bircham Gallery. They're to do with shadows, making shadows on the wall. And I found a little illustration of that. And of course, you remember, we've all done that as children. Throughout any age, every culture, the shadow on the wall is such a resonant way, and it's a way of making pictures. That was a little trigger, set me off on a whole group of work. Sometimes a title. When I was a student at Goldsmiths, this phrase, not enough room to swing a cat. I did a lot of cat paintings. Not enough room to swing a cat, catastrophe. Lots of cat paintings, and I've got them all rolled up somewhere.
Be nice to see them somewhere.
I'm sure
sometime.
They're disintegrating, but I suppose I have to face that and unroll them at some point.
People have spoken about the sort of three kind of key points in your painting, which is the monumental female figure, the symbolic space, and the totemic nature. Now, the monumental female figure, I mean, that's sort of clear. Symbolic space, that's interesting.
Thank goodness that we have people to write about our art. You don't have to do it yourself. But more and more, and I feel really sorry for each emerging generation from art schools, they really have to be able to write very cleverly and eloquently about their work. Symbolic space, everything's open to interpretation. maybe that's the space of the theatre that I mentioned. For me, often in my paintings, there's a workspace. My figures are quite active. They're gardening or they're nurturing children or even painting. I've done paintings of the studio. They're in boats. They're climbing trees. So very active, that kind of space. And the other artists I've looked at, so that, what was the word? The huge female figures. Monumental female figures. Obviously, Picasso has made fabulous images of monumental female figures. But throughout other art, Paula Monderson-Becker, I think, work fits into that category.
And the totemic nature, that's the kind of wild, free.
I'm not as totemic and wild as I used to be, sadly.
Do you think that just happens as we get older?
I think it very definitely does. And I think maybe there's something about trying to make pictures which reference that now, but it's hard.
It has to come instinctively.
It comes instinctively. I never made a painting about death until my mother died. Loss, I suppose, rather than death. And then my pictures changed quite a lot. So I'm very aware that life can come as an onslaught sideways. You think you know what you're doing and then something will happen to knock you off course into somewhere very interesting if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And you're receptive to it.
The other thing that people talk about in terms of the symbolic space is actually that your images are quite contained within the frame. They tend not, you feel there isn't great life going on out there. It's a moment.
I'm completely obsessed by the edges of the rectangle. I twist bend my figures to fit in, and there is a painting at Bircham which is very daring for me because the figure's cut off at the waist and she's kind of inviting the viewer to look at something within the picture. So she's on one level in the picture and there's another one behind. So that's very unusual. Normally, as you say, I'm all about making the whole world that I'm trying to describe fit into that rectangle.
Is that about control?
Ooh, that's so interesting. Nobody's ever said that.
Oops, sorry.
Possibly. Yeah, I'll have to think about that.
Okay. Now, what do we talk about? 2001, you were made an RA. That must have been an exciting, wonderful moment.
Yeah, I couldn't quite believe it. To me, it meant a lot, really a lot. To some RAs, it doesn't mean very much. And that's still the case. And sometimes people turn it down. And a few years before I was elected, a lot of people wouldn't have wanted to have their names going forward. So that's the triumph of the Academy, really, that it's pulled itself up by its bootstraps to be, I believe, a vibrant alternative in contemporary art, something very different from Tate or Saatchi or those kind of things.
Yeah. Who was the keeper then? Was it Maurice Cockrell? No. It was later.
Brendan Neeland was keeper when I was elected. The schools was in a very different place then, quite separate within the Academy. The Academy has had a reputation for having silos, each department, and I'm not the only one to describe it as that, nobody was working as a team.
And that's changed?
It's changed massively.
Changed in the last few years since you were keeper, do you think? Or was it already changing?
So I had 6 years working in the schools as head of print before I became keeper. So I did a 12-year stint in the Royal Academy schools, which was very, very pleasurable and hard work. As the first 6 years, I was responsible for print. So I had a very clear agenda to improve printmaking, which was pretty moribund there, and I got it resourced. One of the things that I realised is that every other department in the Academy would submit a budget to finance and then they'd get things okayed. The schools didn't really seem to do that. So I discovered there was an IT budget. So we were suddenly able to buy some computers for our students because, of course, everybody needs a computer.
Yeah.
It's a curious and wonderful place, the Academy. I think Gary Hume said the terrible thing about the Academy is that it's so slow to change. The wonderful thing about the Academy is that it's slow to change.
Were you aware that you were being considered for keeper? Did you have to apply for it? Or
So, when my boss as keeper, Maurice Cockerell, had to step down, I think he wouldn't have wanted to step down. He would have stayed, but you can only hold office to the age of 75, which I think is fair enough, because if you don't move on, younger people, say people who are 65, never fill those shoes. And I was very anxious to get a really good person in place. So I was saying to certain other Royal Academicians, you should really think about doing this. It's very worthwhile. And you'd enjoy it. And eventually Malcolm, my husband, said to me, "Isn't it really your job?" And I thought, whoa, is it? Dare I say that? So this thing of which a lot of people will understand, female modesty or false modesty or whatever you want to describe it as, shyness, being retiring, was something I really had to confront to stand for that. And I was unanimously elected, and in the end, all the people I tried to persuade to stand, nobody stood against me. Because I think perhaps it was my job. I'd already done 6 years in the school. I'd had a wide teaching, career, and I'd made my way as a practicing artist.
And time for a woman.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody was, the majority of people who voted for me were men at the Academy at that time.
And what does it actually entail, being keeper?
Interestingly, you can make of the job what you like. There isn't really a rule book. So some people engage a lot with the world outside, and that's part of fundraising, which is becoming a more and more important thing. I really was already connected with the schools, workshops, all the staff and students, and I don't think I could have done the job had I not felt I had the support of the people who it really mattered to. And remember, the schools offers a 3-year full-time free education at the highest level for fine artists.
One of the things I loved seeing there was the life drawing class, which has been the same for 250 years now, I suppose, and that is still used for life drawing, is it?
It's still used for life drawing. It's not the same as 250 years ago, because it took the Royal Academy female students at least 60 years of agitation to get access to the life room. So women didn't compete on equal terms for a long time. The schools, it's there, but at postgraduate level, not everybody is drawing from life. Most people aren't, in fact. But there is a vibrant community of different artists who come in and use the life room, so it's something that everybody values.
Yeah. So people can come in from outside and use those facilities.
Yeah, they are various groups that have, kind of agreements.
Right, like I couldn't just wander in. And
you probably could.
One of the things, of course, and I'm sure it's something that people are particularly interested in, is the summer exhibition and how much you had to do. Last year you were responsible for it, were you not?
Last year I was Grayson Perry. Grayson Perry's Grayson Perry this year. He's curating it. Each year the challenge is to make what could be a very, very similar show every year to be a different show. It's always got the work of the academicians, some invited artists, and hopefully as many of the send-in as you can get on the walls. But there are lots of arguments and people coming at it from different directions. So it's pretty hard for the send-in to get on the walls. So when they're there, when I was hanging, I always wanted to prioritise the people who really didn't, were lucky enough to get there. It meant something to them.
And how many applicants are there?
It's changed a lot in the recent years, because now the first stage is all digital and we cap it at 12,000 applications. So we look at 12,000 in a week. But this year they didn't cap it. I think they had between 15 and 20.
That's incredible. We had, I think, 200 and something or other. I don't know where James is, 230 or something for the
Yeah.
John Hurt Art Prize. That was hard enough to
That was
choose
hard enough.
36. Yeah. I can't imagine how you begin to do it.
Well, the truth is that, no matter how clever and visually aware you think you are, you're going to miss things. So you hope that the rest of the panel will pick up on things. But a lot of excellent work never makes it onto the walls.
Yeah.
And it was the same in the John Hurt Prize.
Yeah.
There were people we wanted, then we had to suddenly get rid of another 25.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you get things, presumably, that you kind of wish you didn't have to hang.
Yeah, you do. You
in a
do.
dark corner or up at the top.
You
or-
hide it on the walls.
Yeah.
I don't know how much that works. But it is, it's part of the thing that keeps the Academy going. At its best, it's diverse and open and inclusive, broad-ranging. At its worst, it's a bit of a nightmare, hodgepodge. But I think people have worked really hard, giving up their time, usually unpaid. I was unusual because I was doing it while I was still keeper. So as keeper, I had a salary. But most of the academicians, they come and they do a stint on the summer show.
Why did you decide to leave? I mean, to resign as keeper. Or did you decide?
So you're elected for 3 years, and I could have done up to 5 terms, which is pretty ridiculous, I think. I did 2 terms, 6 years, and then I had a flash of enlightenment that I didn't need to do it anymore. Also, some things changed around me, certain deadlines that I thought I had in terms of fundraising, we're refurbishing and renewing our schools and fundraising for that. So just the schedule around me changed, and I thought even if I did another 3 years, I wasn't going to achieve that. And actually, I'd better get cracking and be a full-time artist.
But you did work when you had a studio there.
I
think.
had a studio there. I've always worked. I've
Yeah.
always prioritised work. Even when I had little kids running around, I don't know how much of my head, I can't pretend that I was in the studio intellectually committed to it all the time. But I did a lot of thinking and preparation, and then I'd go into my studio and I'd work like fury. And I still do that a little bit. I don't seem to have a slow button or off. I'm on.
All or nothing.
It's very
mostly all by the sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now there are certain things I don't do anymore. I don't do gardening. I don't do cooking. I don't shop for food. I've earned my time in my studio.
Yeah. And you're working, I think, in different medium now. I mean, you've been doing some, well, not exactly sculpting.
Yeah.
What would
So people think of my work in terms of imagery, which I kind of take for granted a little bit and hope that it keeps evolving and chugging along and new things come and go. But what really also turns me on, that I think people are not quite so aware of, is materials and process. And recently I did some bronzes, which I cannot pretend are sculpture. They are more like bronze collages, because I think I already described my love of things pre-perspective. I don't really visualize things in the round. I'm very flat in the way that I see things, and I think that gives my pictures maybe a dreamlike quality.
Now that was a collaborative process, wasn't it? The bronzes, some of which are in the Bircham Gallery. Those of you who haven't seen them.
Yeah, I was really very lucky to have Kathy Pilkington, RA, who said she would help me make some objects. I've worked with ceramics before, and I've worked with 3 or 4 wonderful potters over the years. But I hadn't ever made anything like this. I don't know how to describe them. And Kathy and I decided that she could come to my studio with a portable sculpture kit and assist and teach me at the same time. And I had some ideas, and she had some ideas, and we decided we would work in wax sheets, and we would work with clay and melted wax as well. So the things in the Bircham Gallery are constructed out of wax. So I really do find being out of my comfort zone really delicious. I always felt that with teaching. The great thing about students is they probably don't really care that you might have had a 40-year, history of making art. they're only caring how you're relating to them at that moment. And that is really, really refreshing. So the discussion with a student, I find is as if there's no history.
Yeah.
And you can ask the most personal questions about how are they doing things, why are they doing them. And I'm a great listener, so I feel that my teaching is not so much telling people what to do, it's allowing them to tell me what they're doing.
So it's giving them the space to work out the ideas with somebody.
A sounding board.
A sounding board, absolutely.
And Kathy Pilkington was like that with me. I also do lots of different kinds of printmaking, some of which I'm pretty good at, some of which I'm pretty hopeless at. Litho I find incredibly difficult. It's so subtle. Somehow I cannot manage it. I'm not going to stop, though. I'm going to try some stone litho soon.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. What next? What now? Obviously, lots of things you want to try.
Oh, so I do have something I'm very excited about. I started doing some conventional portraits of my graduates, actually, people who I'd taught over the past sort of 10 years, asked them to come and sit for me for 3 hours, and I've been drawing them. With them, I've never drawn portraits, and I've not really drawn objectively, other than the occasional burst of activity, ever since I stopped life drawing. Occasional burst of activity in that I'd do some life drawing, or I'd set things up.
Or like the dance pictures from Giselle Akram-Khan's
So
Giselle.
About 3 years ago, I got the opportunity to follow a ballet through from rehearsal, Akram-Khan's Giselle, and I think that planted the seed again for objective drawing, because I was working from the ballet dancers who were moving the whole time. Then I got 1 or 2 of them to come to pose for me. But I wasn't interested in portraiture, I was interested in the body. So somehow I've come round. I think it may be to do with me analysing a little bit. I've come to the end of 40 years of having really wonderful relationships with other artists, students as they were. Now they're mostly artists. And so maybe it's some sort of making sense of all that. And I got very brave. I started to draw with pencil, which I think if anybody draws, we all know how difficult it is to draw in pencil. You can't hide with a pencil.
No. So faces becoming more important then, rather than bodies and shapes.
Oh God, I hadn't thought of that. Well, I've still got my studio work that I'm doing. Again, it's this idea I can compartmentalize that a little bit. It's a different activity. When I go to my printmaking studio, it starts off as a similar activity to drawing and painting, but then it becomes printmaking. And I managed to make a separate studio for the portraits. Also, they're just for me. There's no agenda with the portraits.
Anything you want to try you haven't done?
Oh God. I'd like to go back to ceramics. I've never found the right person to work with since the original 2 or 3 people. I was working with the most wonderful ceramicist. We were getting absolutely nowhere, but having a wonderful time. Janice Chilenko, who sadly passed away. She's, I learnt so much from her. We didn't produce really very much, but it was. So that was, I do want to do things.
Yeah. So
you don't really know what they are until you find the opportunity to do them.
Yeah. But plans to go on and significant works to come.
Oh God, yeah. I really want to measure the next 20 years as something I want to achieve. God knows what, but I do want to achieve something between being 65 and, if I live long enough, to be 85.
You'll be 85, I'm sure you will.
Thank you.
Shall we try opening it up to the audience? I'm sure there's lots and lots of questions here, things that I haven't touched on, things that I missed out.
It might be just too hot.
Or maybe it's a little bit hot.
Is the female figure in a lot of your paintings, or the ones in the Bertram Gallery, which are the only ones I've seen, is it the same figure each time? Is it intended to be the same figure?
Could you hear the question at the back there? It is the figure, the figure, as for instance the images that are in the Bertram Gallery. Is it always the same figure?
Meaning, is it the same
Person.
person in your mind?
No. I have no intention, but they are obviously quite similar. I find it quite hard to paint age, so they look the same, similar, timeless. I always wanted them to be timeless, but maybe that's becoming a bit of a signature now. I don't know. It's a good question. Can't give you a good answer.
Is there anything wrong in becoming a signature?
Ooh.
Or is it feel safe?
I'm very aware that I have a strong style, and I don't worry about that too much. But I use imagery and ideas and reuse them. I don't really worry about that too much. But nobody wants to repeat themselves. So I wouldn't want to do that, hopefully.
Yeah. Any more? Lady there.
Do you know, I don't really do Pride. I absolutely don't, to be honest. There are things that I like and I'm happy with in my work. You know, I'm completely besotted by my children, but it's never no relationships that are meaningful are ever easy. Biggest difference
That you've made.
Oh, that I've. Yeah. There were probably lots of women who would have been good at doing it before me had they been able to stand for election, and maybe they wouldn't have been elected in the 50s. One of my academy colleagues, Alwyn Bowie, whose work I love, she's probably 80 now. She'd have been a fantastic officer of the academy, but she would have never had the confidence to put herself centre stage.
Were you aware of the sort of weight of history and expectation when you took it on, or did you just get on with it?
I don't believe in destiny or that kind of stuff, really, that you're going to make a difference, it's your destiny, any of that. But people do talk that way at the Royal Academy, and I think it's rather pompous.
I think she just called me pompous.
No, not you. To talk that way about themselves.
Yes.
That what they're doing is one's destiny. Also, I think I would have been terrified if I'd have thought it was hugely significant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just it was about time, you know.
Yeah.
Your name gets written on a door. It says Eileen Cooper, Keeper. It was about time they had a female name on that door.
But while you were there, you championed, I think, quite a lot of diverse artists. I mean, Yinka Shonibara immediately comes to mind.
I think that if the Academy doesn't reflect the changes in society, then we, the Academy, will be irrelevant. And there was a time when people were very reluctant, I mean, even to have women. So I think that it's good to be outspoken. Yinka is the most amazing Royal Academician. He gets stuck in, he's not too grand for it. Lots of the big stars don't really want to give perhaps the time because maybe they haven't got the time. So I'm in complete admiration for him. And there are a lot of people like that, maybe not so high profile, but the Academy now has several non-white members. Frank Bowling has been, he's probably in his 80s now. Dhruva Mistry, but few and far between. So now we have our first black woman Royal Academician, Sonia Boyce. And I think that's great. Absolutely. I hope she feels that she can connect in the way that I felt I could connect and make a difference.
And another female keeper, Rebecca Salter.
I'm really pleased to say that when I backed away from it, Rebecca Salter stood for election and was elected. So we have now the second female keeper. And she, who knows, there might be a first female president, about time too.
Yeah.
Won't be me.
Why not?
I've now got my 20-year plan.
Must be some more questions. At the back, I can see a hand.
Lady in black?
Yeah.
Oh.
Lady in blue.
How important do I consider drawing?
Drawing its widest sense and in education. For everybody. Yeah.
So I think you can teach anybody to draw. I absolutely believe that. You can't teach everybody to be creative and imaginative, but drawing will open doors for them to appreciate and understand the world. So I think in order to put down visual ideas, drawing is a wonderful tool. I wouldn't say everybody has to do it. There are lots of people in art school where they've had a bit of drawing. It's not really part of what they do in the sense that you're talking about, but they have extraordinary skills that I don't have. I'm not very preachy. I know what drawing means to me, and my kids and most of the people I've taught, actually, even if they don't, it's not visible, in what they do. So maybe somebody's gone on to film and their drawings have taken on a different attitude in in notebooks, or a different form. What do you think it's important? Yeah, yeah, it does get on my nerves when I hear that people are doing installation for a GCSE, I have to say. But that's me being... I said I wasn't preaching, here I am preaching.
Well, arts are generally really marginalised in schools now. Music, my own field.
I think I've been a bit protected from that because I've been teaching at postgraduate level.
Yeah.
But it seems to me so important that people can express themselves visually.
Yeah. In film, particularly,
And in
because
acting,
you do
music.
need that education, that understanding to move forward. And film is this is my soapbox. Film is actually it brings more money into this country than anything else, which seems unbelievable, but it is actually true. And we're getting less and less students from the UK going to film schools because they're all coming from overseas, because children here aren't taking the exams, aren't studying the things that they need to study to give them those basic skills to be getting into film school, which is very serious and worrying.
One of the things that's happening is, because it's so expensive to go to art school, independent art schools are springing up, which I think is very healthy. So we've got several in London. I'm sure you've got them in Norwich. I'm sure they're springing up in Scotland. And that's a really healthy alternative to doing it as a university degree. So I'm very thankful that I didn't do university. I did DIP AD. Nobody had any, there was no pressure on me to excel in many, written, although I did write. But
You still write?
I've been known to, if I'm forced to string a sentence together, but I'm not confident in writing in the way that I am with imagery. I know that I've definitely tilted from being quite, on the ball with writing when I was a student, a schoolgirl. Maybe poetry and writing and art were running parallel at one time, and then it definitely the balance tipped.
Yeah. Which I think we're probably all quite thankful for. But who knows? Eileen Cooper, poet.
Oh, God.
Anybody got any more questions? We have a few more minutes.
just-
I think.
Much less. Yeah. It's such a great question, the class in the art world, for example, and in education. And it's a massive, massive question. I think there are far less what you would call working class kids coming forward. And at the academy, so the higher the level, because of course if they've gone and done BA, they've got student debt. Do they really want to come live in London? And even though the academy schools are free, so it's a big question. I'm very aware of it. And you can't have been my role at the Royal Academy, there are a lot of very entitled, highly educated people around it. Everybody wants new audiences, so it's very important for us to open our doors. And I don't know what the answer is, but I suppose people like me and you being aware of it and spreading the word. And I remember when I was at one very big dinner and the speaker was Jeanette Winterson. That really resonated for me, because there she was, almost with my accent, holding court and being so clever and fabulous. What a great role model.
Do you think we're getting closer, or are we
I think we're getting further away.
Yeah, that's a feeling we might be.
Because it's a very expensive pursuit, higher education. And we're very good at selling it to the world, so people will come from all over and pay even bigger fees. I have to say, the beauty of the Royal Academy schools is that we are liberated from that. We don't have to take foreign students because they're paying high fees, because nobody pays fees. The academy pays for the students who study there.
Yeah. Anybody else? I'm sure I saw a hand somewhere. Come on, somebody must have questions. Amanda.
I wanted to ask about the role of the male figure in your work, because I don't know how much the male figure features in your work, because when I think of your work, it's the female figure that I think of, because maybe that's the figure I recognise and I see, and we were joking about seeing myself trying to pull on that jacket held up and think. Can you talk a little bit about how much the male figure has featured in your work and your relationship to it?
Did you hear that question?
It's about the male figure.
I'm not very good at drawing male figures. So with my portraits, I've got quite a lot of young men who I'm drawing. And I'm very aware that I've got 2 sons, and male children have featured in my work. Yeah, I'm less confident with a male experience. They're often in a very important supporting role, I would think.
Was there somebody there? Yes.
So I was the last keeper to have that apartment, but after a few months it was absorbed mostly into the redevelopment of Keeper's House. Do you know, I think that my predecessor had already agreed to it. So the studio still existed, and it's a rather fabulous studio, but it was never my place where I really connected. I always preferred my home studio to working there. Good place for showing off in, though.
James, you're lurking. You've got something to ask.
No, I was waiting to say thank you, really, if there's no more questions. Are there any more questions?
Is there anything else you want to say that you think you haven't said that I didn't ask you?
I'm amazed how many people have turned up in this heat. I hope Anwen and I have been interesting. Thank you, Anwen. You were very interesting.
Oh, in that sort of Chinese sense of interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I do have something to say. This is a wonderful book. Those of you who haven't seen it, it is at the Bircham Gallery, and I can thoroughly recommend it. It's just gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. So go and have a look. They've definitely got some copies left. But at the back, it's Eileen's book, obviously.
I have to say I'm very sorry that I'm on my train in about 10-15 minutes, leaving for the station. But I have engaged with Holt quite a bit. I feel that
Indeed you
dropped into a parallel universe, which is quite enticing, really.
Yeah, that's really what I wanted to say. thank you very much, Eileen. She's been up here pretty much all week, was here, started last Friday and judged the art prize, and this is her third talk, and obviously she has an exhibition as well. So Eileen, thank you very much for coming up and being a very special part of the art at the Holt Festival.